Hey, if you've been paying any attention in recent years, we have seen an explosion of what they're calling drag queen story hours. Of course, these are opportunities where grown men put on eyelashes, lipstick, dresses, fishnet, stockings, high heels, and show up in libraries to read children's storybooks to a bunch of little kids. Now, if you're like me, you ask the question, number one, why would a man want to dress like that? And number two, why would any parent in their right mind bring their children into such a perverted setting? But nevertheless, this is where we're at. In our podcast today, we're going to talk about how this is not something new and avant-garde. This is ancient. In fact, it goes all the way back to some of Ishtar's sorcery. And we're going to expose that in the podcast today. You will not want to miss it.
Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
Here we are again on our weekly, never-ending quest for truth, and we are on a crusade currently to rescue manhood and womanhood. That's a pretty noble crusade. Biblical femininity, biblical masculinity. In fact, that's what our sermon series has been on Sunday. So if you're not in the neighborhood, you can't come by and enjoy everything live. We encourage you to go on our Living Stones website, which is lstones.org, and take in the series. I think it'll be a great. And we didn't plan on this, but it's actually dovetailing together really, really well with our walk through Jonathan Cahn's book, The Return of the Gods. So let me just make a shameless plug. The fact that at Living Stones we love men, we love women, we love mothers, we love fathers, we love children, and we are committed to strengthening and restoring broken families and strengthening marriages. That's been our cornerstone here. But it's interesting that, like for instance, this coming Sunday is Mother's Day, and at Mother's Day at Living Stones, we go all out. We want to honor the ladies of the house. We want to celebrate motherhood. We want to honor the hard work that goes into raising the next generation. Your folks are in town, which is great, so that's always special. But it's just a great time to say, hey, Mom, thanks for all that you did, all that you do. Celebrate the institution itself of motherhood. And I guess I'm bringing all this up because not only are we wanting to celebrate, moms on Sunday, we also have an incredible event on that Friday night, in fact, this coming Friday night, which is one day away, a great women's event at 6, I believe it's 6:30 at night, and that's for mothers, daughters, great time of fellowship, ministry, food, so you will not want to miss that. But here's the question I'm asking: How long, if we do not see a revival of truth and the gospel in America, I wonder if our days of Mother's Day and Father's Day are limited.
Yeah, I believe that's the truth of the reality in the world, and the truth of the world is not changing. Our culture can change, but the truth of it's like gravity. Right. Like gravity is not changing.
Right. It's not going anywhere.
You can't pretend gravity's not there all the time. You're the one when you jump up a building, it's going to hit.
Right. Yeah. So reality has a way of slapping you in the face. But it's interesting. Even in our schools, there's the language. You alluded to this last week. How important it is to keep the language and have proper definitions. But in a lot of our woke school systems, you're not allowed to talk about mother or father. You have to talk about parent, because mother and father are no longer cool terms.
They're no longer necessary for the family unit.
Yeah. So the traditional family, we say things like, well, there's lots of arrangements for families nowadays. Well, not according to God and the Bible. But anyway, that's the challenge that we're facing. So we're going to celebrate motherhood. We're going to continue to celebrate motherhood. We're going to teach on what it means to be godly men and godly women, because it's under assault right now.
Yeah, and even before we get to this chapter, I mean, the DNA, the origin of the Living Stones come from a place of serving broken families.
Yeah.
Broken marriages.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is dear to our heart, our call, our cause, because we begin, I mean, not me, but the origin of the church began as seeing brokenness and wanting to heal the brokenness and realizing, wow, a healthy family a strong father, a strong mother, right, in a healthy family unit leads to that restoration of that pain that we're trying to heal and restore. We start with healing marriages.
Right. And you bring up a really good point, and one that makes it really hard to walk this line. So when we go back to the way God created things, right? You go back to the created order. That's the template. That's the blueprint. That's God's plan for maximum blessing. But as you pointed out, we live in a broken world, a fallen world, and so we're going to see divorce. We're going to see single parenting situations. These are painful. We're going to see situations where one spouse violated the covenant, and there's all kinds of pain and brokenness, or abandoned the home, right? So there's always the exceptions. And then when you establish the standard, people will say to you, well, are you judging me because I'm a single parent? No. It couldn't be farther from the truth. We're not making judgments. We're just simply establishing the truth of the pattern and the blueprint that God has laid down for us in Scripture. If you follow the blueprint, that's the pattern for maximum flourishing. Yeah. We're not saying that a single mom trying to raise a family right now is somehow less. We're saying that the pain of what you're going through is not how God intended it to be. Nobody was intended to try to raise children and run a family by themselves, whether it's a father or a mother. So we're not judging. We're just simply saying there is a standard. There is truth. God has laid a pattern for maximum human flourishing, and it's in the Bible. And our job, again, is to strike the balance between dropping the plumb line of truth and yet moving in great compassion and understanding toward people who have experienced the fallout or the brokenness from sin. And that's always, I guess, the challenge that we face as pastors, because anytime you establish the plumb line, you're realizing you're speaking to a whole audience of people who may or may not have experienced the full blessing of that because of brokenness.
Yeah, but hope comes in the fact that there is a creator who has established a way, and there's a redemption that we can get better, right? Yeah. There is a prescription to do this. There's a way that as a culture and society we can move towards more wholeness, more redemption, and ultimately to look more like the kingdom of God, like the Lord's Prayer. And that's what our goal is, to move towards something, and not just to say, hey, we're going to meet everyone and just say you are where you are. We want to move towards somewhere. Yeah. There is a vision towards something. But it's spurred from a part of wanting to compassionately heal family, heal hurts. Yeah. And not just saying, well, you're stuck with it. There's somewhere to go.
No, that's a good point. There's hope. And I think that's what we're trying to say is if we get back to the pattern, if we go back to the ancient paths, as the Bible says, we can find our way back to maximum blessing and enjoy family and enjoy marriage and enjoy masculinity. As men, we should lean into our masculinity. But as we've talked about in the last episode, if masculinity itself is attacked, then it creates all kind of confusion as to who am I. I am a male biologically, with my plumbing, so to speak, with my genetic makeup. But what does that look like in a culture that attacks every traditional form of an expression of masculinity? It creates confusion. Same thing with women. What is a woman supposed to be? What is a woman's role? How is a woman supposed to act? What are, a woman's different than a man? What are the personality traits or gifts or expressions of a woman's femininity that are true and accurate based on what God says, not what the latest feminist says. So there's all kinds of confusion there, and when there's confusion, there's going to be chaos and there's going to be brokenness, and that's what we're seeing today. So hopefully, in what we're talking about here, we're charting a course back to sanity. But in the meantime, we still live in a fallen world, and I always like to bring in current examples. And so here we go. We're in the month of May now. We're celebrating motherhood, which is not come under as much assault as Father's Day and what manhood is, because, of course, Father's Day runs into direct conflict with June. And as we get into this, I think it's the next episode in Jonathan Cahn's book, but I always wondered, why is June dedicated as Pride Month? it would seem to make more sense to me from a strategy standpoint that Pride Month should have fallen during school when kids are in school, because then we can push this whole agenda while we have basically a captive public school audience. So why is it in June when kids are out of school? Well, there's a reason. There's an ancient reason. We're going to get into that in the Jonathan Cahn book. But nevertheless, Pride Month is coming. And it's to go back to your point you made last week, where you would think that organizations like Target, Disney, Bud Light, Gillette, there were a whole bunch of them that jumped on this transgender bandwagon, and that paid for it dearly in the bottom line because people were just not going for it. But the question will be, June is coming. Or have they learned? And unfortunately, because of what you pointed out in the last episode, this is a religious zealotry that ignores economic reality and pain. So I'm curious, what's Target going to do in June? What's their rollout? How are they going to adapt? What about Bud Light? Did they learn from the disastrous, marketing campaign last year? I guess we're going to have a lot to talk about in the next few weeks as we ramp up to June.
I can't wait. Sarcastically.
Yeah. Who knows what kind of crazy products they're going to be, promoting? Yeah. But here's one crazy situation. Here's the headline from April 23rd, so it's not that old. Fairfax County School to host drag queen event for children. It says, while June is over a month away, West Potomac High School is offering a variety of Pride events over the next few weeks, including a discussion with Fairfax County Public Schools Pride, a drag queen brunch, and a spring musical production of Kinky Boots. Kinky Boots. It goes on to say that the 2005 film turned Broadway musical features a drag queen named Lola who rescues a man's dying shoe factory. The Fairfax County High School is offering 8 show times from April 25th through May 4th. While the event is open to family and students, the website included a disclaimer reading, quote, "This musical contains strong language and mature content." Now, this is unbelievable because this is probably the same school system that won't celebrate a Christmas program or allow any kind of sacred music, or probably, punishing students who are wanting to, have a Bible study in school or wear a Christian T-shirt or whatever the situation is, that there's open hostility toward any of that expression. And yet here we're actually promoting transgenderism, which is our topic for today. We're promoting things in a public setting with students where you have to have a disclaimer saying the musical contains strong language and mature content. In other words, this is totally inappropriate to be in a public setting with our students, and yet this is being shoved down our throats today.
And so Fairfax County is in Northern Virginia. I'm pretty familiar with the territory.
Yeah.
If you look at like the voting maps of Virginia, it's kind of like Indiana.
Right.
It's like all red.
Certain areas are conservative and certain areas
all
are
red. The middle, where Richmond is, the city, is blue, kind of like Indy.
Yep.
And then one small area up north, right? Also Washington D.C., where Fairfax is like deep blue. But there's so many people living there, it kind of overrides the whole.
Yeah, it skews the whole.
It overrides the whole state and whatnot. There might be some other areas, pockets over here and there. I'm not a election poller, but here's the deal: Fairfax County is where, it's my understanding, where Washington, all the people who work for our federal government mostly live. They don't live in D.C. mostly. They live in Virginia.
Right.
Okay, Northern Virginia, where it's just, it might as well be D.C. So you have some of the wealthiest, most connected people living in that area because they work for the federal government works for them. Let me say it that way. That is the up in that area, like almost everybody worked for the federal government.
Well, so to your point,
Yeah.
this is Family Research Council's Meg Kilgannon. She says, the musical is sponsored by the parent-run West Potomac Theater Boosters. Quote, what continues to shock me is the adult involvement in pushing this kind of sexualized entertainment on children, literally teaching children how to perform in an overtly sexual manner. The parents of the theater kids, some of the most engaged and most financially able parents in the school, are running the booster club to support the theater. So again, this is upper class, or certainly upper middle class.
I don't know. Yeah, just look up the median income of Fairfax County.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is being driven ideologically by wealthy families in the name of the arts, but they're pushing a completely sexualized and perverted agenda through the school system. And again, I guess if you're saying if what you're saying is true, and I know it is, if this is basically a DC suburb, then that's the kind of worldview you're going to get, and any kind of conservative Bible-believing parent is either going to push against a well-funded, well-organized group here in the public school, or you're going to pull your kids out and put them in an alternative Christian school setting or homeschool setting.
Go like one of those in Fairfax. I mean, DC. You guys know what Washington D.C. is like another world.
Yeah,
spiritually, politically. I mean, it's another world, and so there are so much spiritual implications to that arena, that idea. I mean, I'm not surprised at all to see Fairfax County. That's just the demographic. That's what the reality is. It's a little bit like Chicago.
So this is what
Probably
we're up
worse.
against. You know, and this kind of is an introduction to our topic today. It used to be just your standard run-of-the-mill sexual immorality, whether it was premarital sex or whatever. Then we got into same-sex, homosexuality, lesbianism. Now, this spirit of Ishtar, she doesn't stop there. And Jonathan Kahn says the goddess's work would go further and deeper still. Not only would she alter the purpose and nature of a man and a woman, causing all types of gender confusion, but she would erode the lines that actually separated them, and she would merge them together. And so now we're not talking about toxic masculinity or girl power. Now we're talking about completely obliterating all lines of distinction and coming up with some type of androgynous person, a sexless, genderless expression of sexuality, or one that's interchangeable. Which again is the definition of androgyny. He says it's one thing to demasculinize one and defeminize the other, but it is another to superimpose the one onto the other, or to merge the two together. Ashtar's male priests had feminized themselves. They made themselves appear as women. They dressed in women's garments. They made up their faces. Today they would be called cross-dressers, transvestites, non-binary, bigender, or androgynous. Ishtar herself was a female with male attributes. She was the embodiment of androgyny, and so too were her priests as males with female attributes. And so he asked this question: what would happen if the spirit of Ishtar took possession of America and Western culture? Well, the article we just read explains what would happen, because that's kind of where we are today. We would expect to see the merging of male and female, the confusing of the two, feminization of males, masculinization of females, and this is exactly what's happening. So biblical masculinity is frowned on. The same is true for biblical femininity. And not only do we mock, for instance, women who want to work out of their homes, want to be homemakers. We mock that. We ridicule that. Women who love having babies, want to nurture their children, want to be a full-time mom. Again, we ridicule that, as these are people wasting their lives, brainless, baby-making machines, all this kind of stuff. Same thing with a man who just wants to have a traditional family, wants his wife at home, wants her to be a homemaker. We mock all those traditional expressions, and at the same time, we celebrate a man who wears eyelashes and puts on makeup, and we celebrate a woman who is trying to turn herself into a man. Those qualities are celebrated in our culture, while we mock and make fun of the traditional expressions of masculinity and femininity. What could account, asks Jonathan Cahn, what could account for such a strange inversion of nature and reality? He talks here about the problem of biology. He says female icons of popular music and youth culture, unlike those of the earlier generations, now reveled in appearing wild, unruly, shocking, vulgar, and aggressive. Let's pause right there. When you look at a lot of female pop culture, you see these teenage, divas being raised up, and at the start, they're pretty wholesome. They're singing, a lot of times they come out of Disney or whatever, they're singing pretty wholesome songs. But by the time Hollywood gets them, they become harsh, perverted, vulgar. Their costumes are vulgar, highly sexualized, just an edge, an angry, rough edge to them. And just the opposite happens with the men. They start wearing eyeshadow, makeup. The way they conduct themselves is in a feminized manner, a feminine manner. So just the opposite is taking place, with the males. Lipstick, eyeliner, and the trappings of femininity. He says this is precisely what the goddess would do, as attested by an ancient hymn sung in her praise. Quote, she adorns a man as a woman, and she adorns a woman as a man. And he says this gives rise to a brand new concept never before created in history, which is everywhere around us now, gender identity. That somehow your gender could be separated, your identity could be separated from the biology that you were given. Voila.
And it just became this thing that is accepted in academia and then therefore should be accepted by everybody. To the point if I misgender you, could be seen as a assault. Or maybe not physical assault, but some type of
absolutely.
Emotional, verbal assault.
You could be fined, hate speech.
Yeah,
it even falls under sexual discrimination, because here you are. Well, wait a minute, I'm looking at you. You're clearly a man, but you think you're a woman, and because I mispronoun you, I'm guilty of sexual harassment. I'm harassing your identity, even though your biology is completely opposite of your identity.
Yeah, it's just it's a brand new. It's not brand new. It's a completely different religious. It's a religious view. I mean, for me, it's a clash of religion. It's like, well, you have a they were never admit to it, but you have a religion that believes in androgyny. You have a religion that believes that there's this concept of gender identity. I don't. I have a religion that believes that there's no such thing as gender identity, that your biology determines your sex. Even the gender identity is a term that's created, right?
But then you'd be told, Andrew, you're on the wrong side of history. You're a bigot, blah, blah, blah. And it's all couched in that this is like a new revelation, that we're finally giving these people, a place, a safe place to be themselves, to be authentic, blah, 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 blah. And what I'm realizing through Jonathan Cahn's book is that this is not new and avant-garde. This is ancient. Ishtar's temple prostitutes were men who were dressed like women. Like, this is so old school. Like, this has been around for millennia. This is not new and cool and cutting edge. It's only cutting edge because we've rejected God and we turned our back on God, and now Ishtar is having a revival in America. But this is not new. This is actually going backwards. It's not being on the right side of progressive history. It's going backwards several millennia to a very dark, evil, wicked ideology that is already proven to lead to a great destruction and pain. So it's like we shouldn't be celebrating this. It's like, hello, we've been there, done that. We've already handed out the T-shirts. This is an epic failure. This is not something we want to go back and reproduce. And yet, here we are. We have university, queer studies programs that are promoting all of this. In fact, it's interesting. This is another irony. Talk about worldview conflict. Much of the students who are leading these protests, these anti-Semitic protests, are transgender students. The irony of this is if we put them on an airplane and we sent them to Gaza or Saudi Arabia or some of these Muslim countries, they would not be embraced and celebrated as at least they are in America in some communities. These folks would be absolutely slaughtered. They would be thrown off buildings. They would be murdered. The women would be raped. That's because this conflicts with their gender ideology and with their worldview. So it's just, again, it's like a big sloppy goulash of all kinds of competing worldviews that make no logical coherence or rational, combination of what they're believing, and yet that's exactly where we are today. So again, we believe, and we talked about this in previous podcasts, the lie is my feelings trump my biology. Whatever I feel I want to be, you need to accept me. And then now as we're seeing, we're believing that if we just simply remove a man's genitalia, that somehow we've created a woman. What a nonsensical, idiotic thing. Because from the biblical perspective, a woman, when God created men and women, there is something transcendent. There's something about the essence of what it means to be a man that is not removed when you simply cut off his genitalia. You don't turn a man into a woman by simply removing his private parts. And that's exactly where we are today. We think we can recreate biologically a woman when a woman is completely different from a man from the inside out. From chromosomes all the way down to reproductive organs, to physiology, to psychology. I mean, a woman fundamentally sees the world differently than a man, and that's the way God intended it to be. So it is a grave deception that we can somehow interchange the genders and actually have reality in doing so. It is total confusion and chaos, but that's exactly where we are today. And so, for instance, he has a subtitle called "The Kingdom of Magic." We take our young people now, we take them to places like Disney World, which is promoting androgyny and gender confusion. And it's interesting because now we're no longer in Walt Disney World, they no longer are able to use the term boys and girls. Interesting. So they're not even referred to as boys and girls. This is how much Disney is pushing androgyny. We also have, I like this, Ishtar's Storybook Hour, which again is sweeping America, run through our libraries, which again are incredibly liberal and promoting all kinds of perversion with the books and things that are in our public libraries. But who would have thought that we would have grown men wearing makeup, fake breasts, women's outfits, high heels, fishnet leggings, having men read storybooks to children, and having parents actually supporting this perversion. I mean, it's unbelievable. I can't even in my brain come up with an idea of ever where I would ever allow one of my children in the same room with one of these perverts. But that's exactly what's happening in America today. We should wonder why a grown man would want to dress like a woman and would want to do so in the audience of children. What's the agenda there? It's just mind-boggling. But anyway, Ishtar's Storybook Hour, where men are brought to public libraries wearing lipstick, false eyelashes, mascara, high heels, a wig, and a dress formed to simulate a woman's anatomy, and would read to children their favorite children's storybooks. Here we are. Androgyny in our faces.
I mean, I go back to how do you rationalize this interaction? It's because it's religious. There's things about different religion that if you're not part of the religion, you look at it, you're like, wow, that is weird. That's exactly what this is. Why do the parents do it? Because their parents are adherents of that religion. Their parents
or at least sympathetic to it.
Well, they're open. They're seekers. They're seeker sensitive to that religion.
Or they bought in. I always say something like, we have a problem when we try to be nicer than Jesus or kinder than Jesus. Obviously, Jesus is the epitome of niceness and kindness in the truest sense of the word. But when I say that, what I mean is, we're going to have pride parades in all of our major cities, which again, he talks about in that book, the origin of these types of parades. They're not new. They're very ancient. But there will be public sex acts taking place. There will be lewd, crude, perverted, revealing costuming. There will be all kinds of stuff that a parent in their right mind would never expose their child to this type of sexualized and perverted behavior. And yet there will be parents and children lining the streets and celebrating and clapping while their kids look upon this type of wicked and perverted behavior and are damaged by it. I mean, you see that, and you're not ever forgetting that.
Well, to me, it's like us taking our kids to Sunday school. They're indoctrinating their kids into the religions and then into their philosophy that they. Again, this is what I'm trying to articulate to people. Like, people see this as like a human rights issue or progression or evolution of mankind. I'm like, this is a clash of religion. Can we just see it for what it is? It's a clash of religion,
worldviews.
Clash of worldviews and religious spiritual forces.
Yeah,
that's what's happening.
So there is an intention to indoctrinate children that this is
they're
normal
evangelizing
behavior,
absolutely
acceptable.
There's a counterfeit of everything of what the kingdom of God is doing. There's a counterfeit. If you look through those lenses, it all makes sense. They're doing what we should be doing.
Yeah.
Well,
clarify that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. In terms of promoting our worldview into our culture. Yeah,
exactly. Right. So he says, after ages of absence from the mainstream Western civilization, again, I can go back to when my mom or dad were teenagers. Were there transvestites in American culture? There may have been. I'm sure there were, but they were completely underground and hidden. Now they're mainstream and in your face. So this has been a recent emergence. He says, after ages of absence, transvestites, or as they are now called, drag queens, began emerging from the shadows and onto the center stage of mainstream culture. So why do we have Drag Queen Story Hour? Because Ishtar is alive and well, and she's the latest. This is the latest iteration of a very old demonic spirit that was, part of these ancient cultures that we read about in the Bible. And this was part of temple worship. This was part of Ishtar's magic to turn men into women and women into men, and to actually make them unnecessary in terms of their complementary nature. And we talked about that, Sunday. 3 things that the biblical account does for genders. Number 1, it says that men and women are equal because they're made in the image and likeness of God. Number 2, it says men and women are different because God made male and God made female. And so the fact that they're different means we should lean into those differences and understand what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. But the third point that Ishtar attacks is the last point. Men and women were not made to compete. They were not made to be independent of each other. They were made to be complementary. And when basically you say that a man can be a woman can be a man, what you're saying is that neither gender is really necessary. You can be a man or a woman depending on the season. Mm-hmm. If you want to be a man today, you can be. If you want to be a woman tonight, you can put on a dress and go read storybooks to kids in a library and pretend that you're a woman. Whatever you want to be, man, and so again, there's just a complete attack and assault on the foundational blueprint for human beings, and it's intentional because it's demonic. It's intentional because Satan hates people created in the image and likeness of God, and so this is what we have. But I think if our listeners could understand the spiritual nature behind this is Satan trying to destroy human beings. If he can take a man and have a man think he's actually a woman, he's destroyed that man. If he takes a woman and lets her think that she's actually a man, he's effectively destroyed that woman. And if we can take the genders and remove all distinctions, you're going to have a hotbed of confusion, and family formation is simply not going to happen.
Yeah, I think this goes back to our discussion. I think last week we talked about the nuances, right? There is when you say there's no difference, you're removing the uniqueness and the gifting of that God's given that individual.
Yep.
We can talk about just natural gifting. Someone may be good at administration or good at speaking or other gift, but being a man is a gift. Being a woman is a gift.
Yes.
There's superpowers that God's given a woman that a man cannot do, and vice versa. These are powerful gifts. Now, do we put some societal boxes through different cultures in which we limit some of those roles? Yes, there are some roles, gender roles through human fallen nature that we put men and women in a box. However, to say everything in the box, go into complete
blow
extreme,
blow
the box, and everything's the same is totally too extreme. Versus going back to say, no, there's nuances. There's some things that would put people in a box. We got to set them free, men and women, from those boxes.
Yeah.
But there are many, many things that are differences. There are gifts that God's given us. But we don't want to have that nuanced discussion. We want to just turn over and says, we're going to recreate everything.
Well, and let's give a good example here. There's this sticky problem called biology, all right? Women were made to carry babies. And so what does our culture do today? Instead of celebrating the fact that a woman can get pregnant and has the gift of bringing life into the world. That's a gift that a man doesn't have. We have different gifts, but that's not it. We'll never experience what it's like to carry in your own body, in your womb for 9 months, another human being, and then to give birth to that little baby girl, baby boy, and then to hold that baby at your breast and feed that child and nurture that child, which again is part of what it means to be feminine, this whole thing of nurture. All of that is despised now, and since we want androgyny, right? We want a sexless culture with no boxes. What do? Well, we tell men that they can not only become a woman, but that they can breastfeed, that they can have a period. And so we do all these ridiculous things where men are having fake periods. They're inserting red fake menses basically in themselves and pretending to have periods. In their mind, it's real. They're pretending to breastfeed, which again is absolutely ludicrous. And then what do we do on the other side for women to liberate them from their biology? We create birth control pills, and we abort them. So the way we liberate women from their biology is we shut their ability down to procreate, or we murder the child that they've conceived. So we go to these demonic ends to get rid of the boxes. But when those boxes have been established by God, some of them, like biology, you cannot overcome biology. But we're sure trying today with all the gender mutilation and all the ridiculous things that are happening, the hormone drugs that are shutting down kids' normal sexual development. I mean, it's a brave new world, strange new world, a Frankenstein kind of world that's going to produce all kinds of horrors. But that's where we're at, and androgyny is kind of the end of the road for gender denial and mutilation. And that's what Ishtar's about, absolutely destroying men and women made in the image and likeness of God.
Yeah, and I think even the heart of all this is there's a degree of postmodernism, which is since there's no God, there's no creator, we are a master of ourselves. I mean, it's right. Really a sense of like,
I'll be whoever I want to be. I am we ought to create ourselves because there's no overarching creator. There's a vacuum in creator, so we are our own creators. And what's more creative, what's more domineering than to be able to alter our own biology, alter our own gender, right? Yep. But again, what this book is showing us is actually that's a hoax. That's a con. It seems like I'm giving you more freedom, but really you're actually subservient and worshiping this figure that you probably never heard the term Ishtar before, which leads to what? Does it lead to more freedom? Right. Nope.
It leads to more oppression.
Yeah.
It leads to less freedom. And it came from that perspective of you are your own God. You get to dictate whatever you want, change whatever you want about yourself.
And I'm going to, this goes back to Baal, right? The eraser of all the lines, the inverter. I'm going to take the established boundaries that God has put in place, and I'm going to erase them. I'm going to kick the fence down. I'm going to do my own thing. Who says? Who says I need to do this? Who says that's what a man is? Who says that's what a woman is? Who says we can't have sex? Who says? It's the spirit of rebellion rooted in, again, Baal that just says, you know what? I'm going to take the created order and I'm going to do my best to turn it upside down. And that's what we have today. We talk about radicals, revolutionaries. What they really are is folks that are rebelling against the natural order. And that's why at the root of a lot of these even anti-Semitic rallies is really an anti-Christian, anti-God spirit. It's no different than the BLM movement we saw last year, which really fundamentally was not about race. It was about tearing down the system. And capitalism is included in there, free markets, a lot of these, maybe we'll get into these in future podcasts, but a lot of this comes right out of a Judeo-Christian understanding of freedom, which leads to economic blessing. But these folks hate capitalism, hate America, hate the Bible, hate the church, hate the Jews, hate anything that is Western Civ. That's really the Antichrist spirit behind all of this chaos that is happening, not only sexually, but happening ideologically on our university campus. It is a massive mess. Which is what you get when you turn your back on God. But in the midst of all this, we're seeing, and this we are always prisoners of hope. We're seeing a great move of God. We're seeing many young people coming to Christ. We're seeing revivals breaking out on college campuses in various places. I mean, truth wins, and I'm as you are. We're optimistic. This is the mess that we're in, but light always dispels darkness. So, as the church continues to preach, teach, love, serve, proclaim the gospel, none of this is beyond redemption, and that's the good news.
And there's a turn towards masculinity because there's a vacuum for it. There's a turn towards true femininity because people long for it. Those are truths that you cannot deny.
Yeah.
You can alter all you want, but there's a craving in people's hearts for it, and it's coming out, and we keep preaching the truth. Yeah. We're on the right path.
Yeah. So let me just make a quick plug here. On Wednesday, the 15th, we've got Dr. Bill Crevier coming to Living Stones. He's going to be a special guest speaker that night. Our event is called the Great COVID Con. We're not saying that the COVID virus was not real. It was, but we were incredibly lied to over this virus, and those lies are leading to the deaths of many, many people, the damaging of many, many people. Most of all, the damaging of public trust, because what we found is that the institutions that we trusted, especially, quote, medical or health institutions, absolutely had an agenda, and it was not a godly agenda, and that we've been lied to. So this is going to be an important gathering. We're getting ready for the upcoming election. Who knows what some of these globalist folks have up their sleeves. But this is a well-trained doctor who was responsible personally for saving hundreds of lives in the Chicagoland area. He's going to share some of that story, and then we're going to highlight 3 of the biggest medical lies during the COVID con. You're not going to want to miss that. So please come on out that night. In fact, I encourage you to invite your friends to come out that night. It's going to be well worth our while. All right. We'll see you next Thursday. Thanks for tuning in.